Okay, hi everyone. So today I'd like to make a video about some misconceptions about academia and higher education in the United States. I don't really know other countries that well, so I don't know how applicable this is to other things. I think there is some overlap. I'm just going to talk about a few subjects, no particular order to these, but first is graduate school funding, and kind of related issues. Second thing is, can you pursue, you can just, the idea that you can just pursue historical or philological research, humanistic research outside academia, and why that's, I think, a mistaken idea. The third is, the idea that all the students today are still getting useless degrees, in quotation marks. And the fourth is about adjuncts, and retaining faculty that teach, especially um, the kind of disciplines that really can only be sustained in a university, like Middle Eastern languages and cultures, things of that nature. So the first one is about graduate school funding. This is one I hear a lot, especially when brought up about the problem of student loans in the United States. Big problem. So, there's various ideas about how to deal with it. Um, do you forgive them? Do you propose some other system to make paying them off more feasible? There's a lot of ideas about this. That could be there's probably many videos about this. But often, when it's usually there's kind of people that mock or attack um, people that got so-called well, that's kind of different, but and related to the student loan issue, people assume, I think, that if you take out loans for a PhD or for a BA or Bachelor of Science or Bachelor of Arts, you must then be paying for a PhD. This is a completely mistaken assumption. Um, in the U.S., if you get a PhD in any discipline, not any discipline, but in most of the traditional humanities disciplines and also the sciences, you're being paid as a teaching assistant, um, and you are you don't pay any tuition. Your tuition is covered by the fact that you are working for the university, often for less than a minimum wage, or minimum wage or less. Certainly not enough to cover expenses, so that's a big problem. But anyway, you're not paying um, for the graduate school like that. So that's a small one, but I just thought I'd try to address that here. Um, and the amount of graduate school funding in general, has decreased, which is probably prudent given the kind of academic job market. Um, and I guess I will bring up, sort of as a tangent but related issue with the job market, is people say, oh, well, there's too many PhDs for the number of positions, and there's an overproduction, and that is true. But I would say, coming at it from a different direction, um, the the lack of jobs is sort of artificial. So more people now go to college than ever. So you would think that there would be more positions open, but that's clearly not the case right now. So that particular issue is true, but from a different direction. It kind of looks differently when you examine it from that the scarcity is in some ways artificial, although not entirely. The second problem is, that the idea that you can do humanistic research as a hobby. That usually it's like, I couldn't possibly continue in academia. I'm just gonna do this, as a hobby. And I think for some things that could be true. Maybe you're doing like history, writing a history book of something that, uh, U.S. history, for example, where you can read the documents. A lot of the documentation might be pretty accessible, and you can write and publish things. And I think it's something like that you could do it. But for other things, you really don't. It's really too time consuming to do unless you have some sort of full time job that allows you to um, do not only the research work but also gives you the intellectual environment to sustain it, to get feedback. This is why I think um, teaching is very important, not only because um, you have to explain what you research to students, but also, you would have other colleagues that you talk to, hopefully, that help you in the projects that you do, give you feedback that way, that sort of thing. Maybe there could be some other way of doing that that's not a university in the future. I think that's unlikely, but who knows? Some countries do have things like, a National Academy of Sciences with a humanities division that does, linguistics or historical research or literature, and they publish things, and that's seen as, a positive. Um, Unfortunately, I don't think we would have that in the U.S. because generally, there's a lot of reticence to fund something like that. There's already a cultural problem of, people don't like humanistic research, generally, don't see it as a good because it can't be monetized. That's usually the root problem in a lot of cases that people see. Um, so I don't know how you would do that in the U.S., but that is another model that's not like a university. Um, and it just takes a lot of time to do translations, especially if you're working on material that's in a dead language or a language that's not your own. But even if it is a language you speak, yeah, sometimes reading literary or historical text is not easy. And not just literally reading the words, but reading them carefully, knowing the genre, knowing who produced the document, why did they do it, all these things that go into reading critically. Um, that's takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of time to then take all your you know observations and write it into a book or an article. I mean, in my own case, I've worked on got two a couple articles I've trying to publish. It's taken me like a year of work. I mean, that's both for me like drafting the paper and then having it go through the peer review, all that stuff. So it takes a lot of time, and I don't know if that would really be feasible for me to do this on the weekend, especially, as you get older and you have a family, hopefully, you have family stuff, you have a whole life that you have to, deal with. And if you have to work a full-time job and then have your family duties, which are probably the most important thing, I think, um, you don't necessarily have a lot of time left in the week to devote to, to devote to research or writing. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think you'd have to be pretty wealthy, independently wealthy, um, or have some kind of very forgiving full-time job, I guess, that doesn't care if you're not showing up every day. I don't know if those exist, or is not strict about the amount of like hours you have to be in the office or something. I don't know. Um, so the time issue, right? That's a big part of why it's necessary. Another thing I would say is a lot of scholars there, and there are sort of these um, independent scholars that work other jobs or were wealthy, that did write history books, or and I'm using history because that's what I know best. A lot of times, they do miss some things because they're not talking to other scholars necessarily, or things like that. That's not to say that their work is horrible, but there's just kind of things that they might miss. A good example of this, there's a scholar, Audrey Burton, who wrote a really good, um, very dense, but in a good way, a history of the Bukharan Khanate. She was not a professor, um, and she wrote this, and it's a very impressive work because she synthesized all these chronicles and she presented it, in a narrative. And I think that had been the only book about the Bukharans in English. This was published in the 1990s. But as you read it, if there's certain nuances she missed that maybe if she had been in, an academic environment when she was drafting the book, maybe a colleague or something would have said to her, hey, this is good, but maybe you should uh, frame it this way, or look at it like this. Um, so it's things like that, that you might miss. But and there in Turkology you have uh, Gerard Clausen, who wrote the um, very important dictionary of early Turkic, and he never had an academic position, but he was more of like a pure philologist, did not really publish a lot as far as I know, or didn't really publish a lot of monographs. That is a contained book. But from what I understand, in Clausen's case, he had a pretty high paying job and was, fairly wealthy, so that's kind of the issue, right? Um, and I guess my point is with this segment is, it's really not possible to do a lot of this kind of research as a hobby, unless you are miraculously dedicated and the stars align and you can really do it. But expecting that to be the norm is not really practical. I don't think. Uh, the next thing I'd like to talk about is what do students go to college for? The supposedly useless degrees. What does this have to do um, with humanities? The state of the humanities. This is another misconception that like most students go to college for the quote unquote useless degrees. And when they graduate, that's why they have debt and can't get a job because they majored in a useless degree. I mean, first of all, most students now do not major in something that is like a liberal arts kind of degree. They major in something in business or other pre-professional work like healthcare. Um, and the idea of higher ed in the U.S. has pretty much been transformed into job training, which I think is very problematic for a number of reasons. But most students are not doing that, and a lot of the university's money ends up going into programs that I think do not need to be in a college. A lot of things in business I don't think need to be in a college environment taught in colleges. Healthcare is probably a little different. That is, a scientific discipline, so you probably need that in the universities. But you have a lot of stuff like this. That's something I still see a lot on the internet. That students they're getting useless degrees. Another thing is, even if you get one of these supposedly useful degrees, you don't necessarily get a job because of that. A lot of people after, especially after the 2008 recession, world recession, decided to go into computer science or STEM, and now we've kind of come full circle because now the STEM uh, fields have a sort of glut of degree holders, and it's not easy to get a job. I've heard that from people that did graduate from with STEM degrees, engineering or biological sciences cannot find any kind of work. So at this point, as I'm making this video in 2025, it seems like that critique is just really not, really not realistic. And the other thing is, there's also a kind of implication of not wanting to criticize the private sector that does not want to invest money in just training people. So I think it's sort of understandable to a point that, well, you should get a degree in something that you can get a job in. I kind of understand that from an economic point of view. I think I wouldn't want to attack a student for making that decision, but but for the parents, I think that impart this idea of get something useful. They're not really seeing the whole picture all the time. And also, do you need to have a degree in a specific discipline to do a specific job? I mean, certainly for some areas, yes, but do you necessarily need a business degree to learn how to do, I don't know, data analysis or something? I feel like you could probably be trained that on the job. Um, if someone can teach themselves, can learn, Arabic, for example, like I think they can learn to do whatever task it is at a business on the computer, right? The last thing I'll talk about is the sustaining um, positions in things like world world history and Middle East studies and linguistics and that sort of thing. A lot of the hiring now, and this is pretty well documented at this point, but most faculty jobs now are part time. They are not tenure track, especially in the humanities. And the problem is, the downsizing has come with extreme bloat in administration. So you have a lot of like vice presidents of something vague like student success. What does that mean? What do they do in that office? Who knows? Right? It's not like clearly aligned with like actually teaching students. And what it's turned into is that the professors are now seen as just sort of cogs in the machine, and the university is actually just the administration. And there's jokes about creating a student-free university. Like replacing the professors with computers, and then you replace them. It's an all administration university. That's like a joke, extreme kind of joke, but that is a kind of the sort of reductio ad absurdum of this sort of higher education culture. So a lot of the hiring and funding doesn't even go to any teaching faculty. It doesn't go to, buying books for the library or even equipment, in the sciences necessarily. A lot of scientists have to get grants to buy equipment, right? So this administrative bloat has been really toxic for the higher education system, and there's a lot written about this, a lot more I could say, but that's the main problem. It's not really hiring full-time faculty, and the takeover of the university by administration, by overstepping their bounds. I mean, there's always a need for deans and the administrative assistants to do certain tasks, obviously, but it's sort of gone out of proportion. And a lot of faculty are not paid very well, and maybe you think that's good or something, but there's people out there that say that. But I mean, if someone is an expert in especially a very difficult field, they should be remunerated reasonably. And not saying we should pay every full professor $500,000 a year. In fact, I think at a public university that's not good. But when the presidents of a lot of these public universities are being paid, millions of dollars or almost $1 million to administer a state university, I think that's not good. And I think we need to really realize that public universities are important in the U.S. I don't think cutting and austerity is really the answer to address a lot of these problems. But I'll also say that a lot of higher education has had many years to address a lot of these issues, these more structural issues, and they really haven't. And now a lot of people are, I think, reasonably, especially for public institutions, kind of reasonably frustrated with the direction of the university system. And it's understandable, right? Like if you're paying taxes, you want to see something good. But I would always, it's not an easy situation, because a lot of the criticisms, the ones I've tried to address, are not based on like what's really happening. Because a lot of people, older people who have not been in a university for years, or only maybe have students in one, don't really understand how like the institutions actually operate, but they think they do. And that's an issue. And even for students, they only like see so much of how the university actually functions, right? Like, and it's not that they should know this stuff. Like, you don't really need to know this if you're, freshman just trying to go to class. But, like I said, they're not really seeing the big picture of how these things work. And then, they make criticisms based on partial or dated or no information. So that's a problem. But anyway, I think I've kind of maybe lost the thread here, but I just wanted to make this video discussing this. These are some problems. I could probably return to this subject and make more, but given that my channel is about the humanities, basically, I wanted to talk about this and address some of these misconceptions. And hope you found it informative. And yeah, thanks for watching.